Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Lachelle Hatley, and I am the Director of STEM Programs for AAUW. I am thrilled to be moderating this panel today. I just came from AAUW's, well, it wasn't our celebration, but we helped the French Embassy celebrate the 100th anniversary of the milestone of AAUW funding Madame Curie's 1 gram of radium 100 years ago today. So I am still flying high on that amazing event. I learned that November 7th is her birthday. So it was a great time to have the event. And so I'm hoping that we can continue this amazing just theme of women in STEM. And so without further ado, I want to just say a little bit about me. I'm new to AAUW, but before joining the amazing team at AAUW, I have been and still consider myself a STEM or STEAM educator for the past 20 plus years. I have taught everyone from probably age 3 to age 73. I'm a computer engineer by training, and I am, of course, a woman in STEM. And so some of my comments today will come from my experience teaching as well as my own experience going through the pipeline that we will be talking about. So welcome to the webinar. Before we get started, or before I introduce anything and sway anyone's opinion, I want to ask you all a poll question. Where do you think is the weakest location of the Women and Girls in STEM career pursuit pipeline? So I'll ask it another way. Where do you think is the weakest location in the pipeline towards a STEM career for women and girls? And so that could be anywhere in K through 12 education, opportunities throughout college, and maybe even after college, and on into the workplace. So this slide is just to lay the foundation of what I think is a perfect analogy to the STEM pipeline. And I have before you is a bunch of seedlings growing, and they're in what looks like some rich soil, right, in terms of a supportive environment. And I use this image because I want to pretty much set up a metaphor that when we plant seeds, we anticipate that the seed we plant will grow. There's nothing wrong with the seed. We have full faith in the seed, and we focus on the soil. And if we try to make that the best environment possible. And if something isn't right, we don't necessarily dig up the seed and say, hey, what's going on with you, seed? Grow correctly or do better. We actually just make sure there's a lot of sun, ensure that there's enough water, nutrients, etc. And so we really focus on the environment. And so here, the analogy is the soil is the pipeline and the seedlings are the women and girls in STEM. This is certainly my opinion. And so I invite you and the panelists today to push back on this idea as we continue through the discussion and question and answer section of today. But I just want to lay this kind of basic framework for right now, because I haven't heard you all's opinion. So I'm just going to lay mine out there and then we'll see what you all think. All right, now, our amazing panelists. I will introduce them according to their bios. So hold on one second. We have Rebeccawinkle as a senior economic advisor in the American Petroleum Institute's Regulatory and Economic Policy Group. Rebecca works to ensure that API's research is defensible and of the highest quality. Rebecca works across a variety of topic areas within API. She leads research on employment and the future of work, education pathways, diversity, equity, inclusion, and social responsibility, carbon abatement and costs, LNG and crude oil experts, economic impacts, county development, and macroeconomic trends. Rebecca also works closely with teams across API on program development, grassroots outreach, and stakeholder engagement with BIPOC communities. women, veterans, labor unions, and other diverse allies, with the focus on workforce development and STEM education. She's an expert in drilling info in RISI databases and provides GIS mapping services to all API departments. Rebecca graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in economics from Brigham Young University. She also holds a master's degree in public policy from BYU. And Rebecca currently lives in Salt Lake City, Utah, with her husband and 2 children. So we welcome Rebecca to the panel today. Thank you very much, or I should say the webinar. All right, next up we have Rachel Scheffler. She is the Senior Director of STEM Career Coalition and Corporate and Community Partnerships at Discovery Education. As a member of the Social Impact Team, Rachel works with corporations, nonprofit organizations, and foundations to develop strategic education solutions in support of students and educators nationwide. The Discovery Network Social Impact Team creates opportunities for industry and nonprofit organizations to be responsive to the needs of educators and bring creative and engaging programming to more than 30 million students in the United States. Rebecca sits on the STEM Careers Coalition leadership team, responsible for driving strategy, partnership development, and engagement. Rachel's passion for education aligns to the mission of Discovery Education and drives her authentic desire to make a meaningful difference in public education. Rachel's interest in creating equitable opportunities for all students to learn supports her continued interest in K-12 education. Prior to joining Discovery Education, Rachel spent 14 years working in nonprofit healthcare philanthropy. She is a school board director for the Northwestern Lehigh School District in Pennsylvania, and she earned her MBA and BA in communications from LaSalle University and is an active adjunct faculty member in the business department. And last but certainly not least is Gabriele Shaw Cohen. She is an associate professor in the Department of Chemistry at MIT. She received a BS in chemical physics from Brown University in 2003 and a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of California, Berkeley in 2011, where she was an AAUW American Fellow. She was then a CMAD, and I'll have her explain that, postdoc fellow at Stanford University. In 2015, she joined the faculty of MIT. Her research group uses single molecular spectroscopy and ultra-fast spectroscopy to explore the energetic and structural dynamics of biological and bio-inspired systems, particularly photosynthetic light harvesting. Can't wait to hear about that. Her studies have been featured in the CBS radio show Quirks and Quarks and in Newsweek. Dr. Slow Cohen's work has been recognized with awards, including the American Association for the Advancement of Science Marion Milligan Manson Award, say that 5 times fast, and the American Chemical Society Pure Chemistry Award, as well as the Biophysics Society Margaret Oakley Dayhoff Award. I have asked all of them to make sure I pronounce their names correctly, and if I have messed up on anyone, please forgive me. Blame my mind, not my heart here. So if anything was incorrect, please take the opportunity as you begin to answer your questions to correct anything. Okay. All right. So let's see. I have a bunch of screens up and I just messed up my organization here. So welcome our panelists today. And before we dive into any questions, I do want to give them a chance to just talk more about them and introduce themselves much better than I just had. So let's start with Rebecca. you can just tell us more about what you do at API. And I think you're muted because I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Lachelle. You got me and my name right, Rebeccawinkle. And I am glad to be here for this conversation. Happy National STEM Day. And so I think that we couldn't have this on a better day to have this conversation. I feel like you covered it pretty well for me at API, but this is something that is, I think all of us would say something that I'm passionate about, something that is close to my heart. You mentioned in my bio, I have 2 kids. My oldest is a daughter. I have a 5-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And so what used to be more theoretical is now really real and practical when I talk about girls and women in STEM and raising a daughter and a son that can be allies for each other and support growth and opportunity. So I'm just glad to be here and to participate today. Thanks.
Awesome. Welcome. Rachel?
Yeah, hi, welcome everyone. And you also got my name right. Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Scheffler. I'm going to piggyback on the words that Rebecca just shared. I also have 2 children and their daughters, and always have valued K-12 education. Have a history of family members who are educators. And when I had my own and the girls started becoming interested in STEM, I have my oldest on a STEM major as her first year in college. And so being able to marry the work that I do every day and bringing STEM to life and just creating opportunities for children to become interested in STEM, particularly in girls. We were very excited to be able to talk about this today. And really a little bit later, when we get into the conversation, Rebecca and I will talk a little bit about how our lives, our professional lives intersect and how we're talking about STEM opportunities for children in the work that we do professionally. So thank you for having me.
Very cool. And Gabriella?
Well, you described what I do at my name. So all I'll just add on to is that part of the role of being a faculty member, in addition to running a research group and teaching classes, is to really train the next generation of the workforce, and also to train the next generation of faculty who will teach the workforce. MIT produces a huge number of professors that go around the world. And so really thinking about ways that we can build a diverse and inclusive community to then create diverse and inclusive communities around the world, to create, role models and people who can, be examples all over, I think is also an important part of what we do here.
Nice. Thank you for the introduction. So I am having a little bit of a technical difficulty on my end. So my questions unfortunately disappeared. But it's like, I'm glad you all know your questions ahead of time. So Rebecca, would you mind asking your question and then answering it while I figure out what just happened on my screen?
Sure, I will ask and answer.
Yes.
No, I love that. And what you had asked me to start off with before we get going in this conversation, or I guess to get us going, is to talk a little bit. We all, I think Rachel and I and Gabriella, we all have really different perspectives with our professional work and our other personal circumstances. And so for me to talk a little bit about this industry perspective, and as an employer representing API, the American Petroleum Institute is a national trade association that represents about 600 member companies all across the country, and works in all segments, all aspects of the oil and natural gas industry. And so what is it that I am doing here talking about STEM, and why does this matter for us? And so for our industry perspective, we hire a lot of STEM workers. And I loved what Gabriella said about training that next generation to go and kind of move the work forward globally all around the world. And We as an employer, a very large employer, the oil and gas industry broadly, are really the beneficiaries of the training that happens in the K through 12 space and in the post-secondary space. I have a colleague who likes to say that all of our jobs are STEM jobs, and that's not completely true, but it's close. And it's something that we think about a lot in terms of how to attract and retain top talent. I think that one of the things that everyone can agree on right now is that the energy questions that we face are some of the greatest of our time. How to provide affordable, reliable energy globally in an increasingly sustainable way. And in order to do that, to continue to innovate and progress and tackle these questions, we have to have the brightest minds. And that means that we need women. We need women in STEM who can think critically and who can analyze problems and who can pilot and test and push solutions. You mentioned that I'm a researcher at heart. My background's in economics and public policy. And so we do a lot of research at API to understand where we are and what we need to do in order to have evidence-based actions to take going forward. And there was a study released last year by an economic firm, IHS, that projected nearly 1.9 million opportunities, job opportunities in the oil and natural gas industries over the next 2 decades. Women and BIPOC workers are expected to fill about 60% of those. For women alone, which is our particular topic today, we have about 420,000 women who work in this industry. Those numbers reflect to some extent the work that's been ongoing in our industry and in many others that are grappling with similar questions and are trying to support more women in what we might call non-traditional industries and in STEM fields. And also to a large extent, those numbers reflect status quo trends, right? Trends in population growth, educational attainment, geographic concentration, career path choices. So we're hoping that through our work, we can really impact those numbers in a positive way. And so a lot of the work that we do in supporting and investing in STEM education is driven by this critical business need, which again, a lot of industries are facing. And that's a need for smart, creative people who can carry our industries into the future. And by definition, that will include a lot of STEM. And by definition, that has to be diverse. Our former CEO used to say that this work is a business imperative and it's also the right thing to do. And I really believe that. And so that's from an industry perspective, that's kind of how we are involved, are plugged into this pipeline, is at the back end of the pipeline. And then certainly there's a lot as an industry that we need to do on our end once we attract those workers to support and retain and help them grow. You are on mute, Michele.
I didn't want you all to hear me typing, and so I muted my microphone. Anyway, I'm going to push a little further on that. In terms of API, what are you doing to circumvent barriers faced by girls in STEM? And what have you learned that might serve as a model for other companies?
That's a great question. Let me give you a couple of examples. I told you that I'm a researcher, so we do a lot of research about this. And the research that I just mentioned, these job opportunities, the 1.9 million over 20 years, those overarching numbers really belie great variation in the demographic breakout among occupation type within the industry. So for example, while close to 60,000 women work in what we would call professional and related fields, things like engineers, geoscientists, chemists, men outnumber women in those occupations about 4 to 1. And that finding is consistent with a report we did with the Rand Corporation in 2017, which found that men outnumbered women nearly 4 to 1 in earning bachelor's degrees in these oil and natural gas related fields like petroleum, chemical and mechanical engineering, geosciences, and cartography. We also see very low shares of women in our skilled trades jobs, things like pipe fitters, welders, and electricians, which are also STEM jobs, right? Those you have to be able to have really, really solid STEM skills to be able to do those jobs. And the data shows that women's associate degree and certificate attainment in these types of fields relative to men is quite low, explaining some of the disparity that we see coming into the workforce. So that issue of occupational segregation and the education pathways that play into it, that comes up a lot when you talk about women in the labor force broadly. It's in an area that AAUW has done a lot of work in the gender wage gap. It's a contributing factor there. So helping to train and direct women into fields, these types of fields, is a really important way to improve opportunity for women, to improve diversity in the workplace, to improve overall economic outcomes for women and their families. Another challenge that we face is something that we learned in a different research project a few years ago. We found that only 3% of women had ever even applied to work in the oil and gas industry. So in a fictitious example, if we were trying to hire 1,000 women chemical engineers, that would be very difficult if only 250 women got a degree in chemical engineering and only 6 applied to work in our industry. And the barrier for women applying to work in the industry was this very real lack of awareness and understanding of the industry broadly, of the types of jobs that exist and how their skills fit in. So these disparities in skills preparation, in occupational segregation, awareness challenges, these are a few of the bottlenecks in the pipeline that you talked about, that we think about a lot as we consider how to implement policies or programs to better attract, retain, and grow the critical talent group of women. And so we focus a lot on education, which is key to this effort, on building awareness, and on mentorships and partnerships, both internal to the industry with our member companies and our executives who are really leading the way here in supporting what we're doing, and also with external partnerships like with Discovery Education or with post-secondary institutions like our minority serving institution effort, which I can talk about later. But those are some of the ways that we're trying to overcome these barriers that we see.
Awesome. So you mentioned education. That is a great segue over to Gabriele. You straddle the work as both a researcher and an educator / mentor in your collaborative efforts. Can you speak to how you balance these priorities, research, educator, mentor, and perhaps how you approach mentorship for young women scientists?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually don't think of them as separate. How we do research is we do it through active and ongoing discussion with graduate students and postdocs who are fundamentally and undergrads, but they're all in training periods. So how research really gets done is it's through work, principal investigators, faculty members working collaboratively with graduate students, postdocs, and undergrads. And really, that interaction is both what advances the research and what develops these members into independent researchers. I always think about it as the more independent I can get my group, the less work I have to do. So my goal is always to train them to take over my job so I can go sit on a beach with a drink with an umbrella in it. And so that's to say that making them good at doing the research and mentoring them are really one and the same. And, a lot of the education also happens through that work. We know that science, we teach them the fundamentals in their class, but where they're really learning about how science gets done, what's at the forefront of the field, isn't from a textbook. It's from research in the lab, and that gives them an understanding of how discoveries are made. So certainly, you want to be intentional about making sure you carve out the time to have discussions with people. But I don't think that these things are separate, because often also what becomes the most important isn't just those, one-on-one meetings every few months or once a year to really lay the groundwork, but someone's looking a little sad. They look like they're having a hard day, and you say, what's going on? How you doing? And just making sure that they know that they're not alone in the day-to-day, I think plays a really good effort, is really important in this effort.
Awesome. We'll come back to that in just a few moments. Rachel, you're up. You're on the hot seat. In your work with Discovery Education STEM Careers Coalition, you're working with community partners across the country around this critical question of inclusive STEM education. What are some of the trends you're seeing, and what solutions are you seeing as most effective for creating a more bias-free STEM educational model? And are there efforts that partners are staying away from in that regard? And if so, why?
Big question. I'm going to break it down into a couple different chunks. So for all the educators that are on the line and have joined us today, and you may or may not have heard of Discovery Ed, it is a global ed tech company. We work to provide digital solutions for teachers and students across the country globally. A lot of our work is focused that I handle in the United States. So, we have about 30 million students that we work with on any given day on a variety of different topics and ways of engagement. One of the things that I mentioned earlier that Rebecca and I have a commonality with is a program called the STEM Careers Coalition that we launched in 2019. And it was a program that was launched in direct response to everything that we're talking about today. How are we filling the workforce pipeline gaps that we are all either now experiencing or will continue to experience in exponential growth? Not only how are we filling it, but how are we filling it with a diverse workforce of tomorrow? Okay. And really, I think everybody has been able to identify that there is a tremendous amount of work that has to be done to really bring equity into our STEM jobs, frankly, all jobs across the United States at this moment. What I'd like to say is I'd like to take it back to, what is happening in the early grades, maybe your late elementary to your critical middle school times, where students need to start to learn about careers that are out there to explore. Okay. So it's almost like that theory of, if you don't see it, students will never want to be it. All right. So it's modeling examples for students. And I wrote down something that, Rebecca was just saying here when she was talking about lack of awareness. I would also, enter in there. There's a stigma about girls entering skilled trades. And it is a personal mission of mine at some point to talk about this until we don't have to talk about it anymore, about girls considering going to vocational school, girls going to get 2-year degrees that give them some business skills, but they're also learning a trade so that they could think about being entrepreneurs. I don't feel that we are doing enough inside school walls to really start to have those conversations with students earlier. And so part of the work that Rebecca and I are working on together is developing a program where we are infusing content of careers and workforce development at a much earlier age, and that we aren't just limiting students to learning about things that teachers are comfortable talking about. We're trying to provide supports where students have a variety of industries that match up to their skill sets and match up to their interests. And at the same time, really trying to provide our teachers with the same level of supports so that students are having conversations much earlier, aside from, it's time in my junior or senior year to have that career counseling conversation with our school guidance counselors. It really needs to happen much earlier. So I would say, when it comes to what are we doing, I think that trying to bring more diverse conversations, letting students see what they're not seeing so that they're inspired to start to want to learn more and explore all of those possibilities out there. it is definitely something that companies are focused on. You can't not be focused on diversity and inclusion in the workforce now. If you're going to, meet social responsibilities and do the right thing by your communities and do the right thing by building an inclusive workforce, you can't not address this now as a company when it comes to education.
Lachelle, can I add on to something that Rachel said?
Sure.
Rachel, I loved what you were saying about how we need to have these conversations early and about how we need to do it with this lens of not of inclusivity. And I think that one of the things that Discovery Education is really excellent at is building the curriculum in an inclusive way. And so thinking about, Lachelle, your metaphor of the seeds in the dirt, and it made me think of this experience that I had with my daughter, who is 5. I mentioned she's 5. Well, she just started kindergarten this year, and this last year she was doing this online preschool. And she really loved it, and she would talk about what she was learning, and it was great. And anyway, so this one day, so she's 4, so this one day she said to me, Mom, I don't want to do the math section. I don't like math. I'm not good at it, and I only want to do the reading section. And of course, here am I, who I work in this area, right? And I'm going, how did this happen? Like, how could I have gotten here when my little 4-year-old already is like, no, Mom, I don't want to do the math. So I sit down and I talked with her about it. And one of the things that she said to me was that it wasn't very fun, and it kind of made her tummy hurt. And I thought, what? So we're talking about this a little bit more. And what was going on was that the math modules that she was doing it consisted of, they called them speed games. And they had her answering these simple arithmetic problems as quickly as she could in simulated tractor racing and tug of war games. And it had this kind of like fun, but like kind of loud music that would play in the background. And if she got an answer wrong, it would give this loud buzzer sound. And it was really stressful for her. And I thought, wow, the way that this is structured, this whole instruction, the way that it is structured is not oriented toward a thoughtful little 4-year-old girl who is interested in understanding and not just memorizing, who wanted to understand how this was kind of applying to her life. It seemed really like the reading was connected to things she was familiar with, right? And who was very sensitive to when she got things right and wrong. And so these like loud buzzer sounds, if she got a problem wrong, was really stressful for her. And so I was thinking about how these structural factors in education and also in occupations matter. Who is this curriculum developed for? Who are these words and phrases and games geared toward? Do our class descriptions, do our job descriptions and postings, do they use at least gender neutral language? And at best, if we're trying to attract female talent, female oriented language, right? We know that when women seek employment, they care about a variety of factors, including doing something that's meaningful and contributing to their community and to the world. So are we helping make those connections explicit in our curriculum and when we talk about our jobs and our industries, for the education pathways that get us there? And do we do it early enough before my 5-year-old is turned off to math, right? So I think that in terms of the soil and the environment that you were talking about, some of these things that we might not even think about aren't oriented towards women and girls and can really be a turnoff.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm gonna, and continuing with my analogy, I want us to dig a little deeper. So I've been a STEM educator for 20 plus years, right? And the conditions under which women and girls are coming up in, K through 12 and even in the workforce, you all have outlined a great number of factors that contribute or hinder what's happening, what we see. I would argue that these happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We have uncovered the fact that curriculum is not appealing to girls. We have realized that, someone in the question said, could it be that there just aren't that many women, right? And in petroleum and, well, they said petrochemical, concerned about, job. It was a typo. Sorry, Dorothy Jansen asked, could the lack of women in our field be about their concern about a petrochemical job? I don't exactly know what that means, but you can certainly respond to that. But I took it to mean there's just a lack of women, right? And so there's always been a lack of women. And we have identified, in terms of we, I mean AAUW, have identified and emphasized that STEM careers have been masculinized, but they've been masculinized for over hundreds of years, right? And so the problems or the barriers that you all have stated today are great, and I'm glad that you're addressing them, as of 2019. But they've been around for a while. What do you think is the reason for that, and why aren't we moving the needle as much as we would like to, as it relates to the amount of women who are participating and thriving in STEM careers? Anybody can take that. It's just a thought. I wanted to push back and dig a little deeper.
So I don't know exactly why we aren't moving the needle, but I heard your challenge, to think about what has moved the needle that you laid out in anticipation of this panel. And I thought a little bit about what examples I've seen that have moved the needle. And, one issue that we were having is that, yes, women were applying to graduate school at lower rates than men, as expected, but then of the admitted ones, they were matriculating at even lower rates. So that's an additional loss channel, right? Even though they had initially, so somewhere between the initial expression of interest and the decision to actually come to a top tier school, they had decided that that was not the right fit for them, even after getting accepted. And so what we started doing is, at our admitted students weekend, we set up some dedicated time for women to talk to women graduate students. And the first week after that, or the first year after that happened, women actually matriculated at a higher rate than men, and for the first time in history. And so I think, one thing is to really, we know that all of our systems and structures are kind of designed for this gendered male interaction, but really creating within that space for women and space for women to interact, I think, is important. Another example of a program that we've set up is we pair each incoming graduate student, female graduate student initially, now all graduate students actually, with a female graduate student mentor who can help them and serve as a mentor. And so why I'm highlighting these two examples is because I really think it's in these transitions that's so hard. When people are leaving their undergrad institution to decide where to go next, or they're entering graduate school, or they're leaving graduate school, or, there's many other transitions. And it's really those moments that we need to think about ways to facilitate, to kind of bridge that gap.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I think Lana Hill also put in the chat that I'm just going to briefly summarize what you said. I think she said that research demonstrates that the positive effects of role modeling. I think we also have identified that at AAUW National, mentorship, leadership in terms of, and also advancing, like you said, transitioning from undergrad to grad, transitioning from high school to undergrad, transitioning from middle school to high school, right? Trying to get that promotion after you landed that amazing dream job. Those transition points, I think, are really, really critical. And I think we all agree that mentorship is really, really important. And if for those of you out there, if you want to walk away with one thing, walk away with that mentorship is really, really important as it relates to throughout the entire pipeline, not just transition points, but letting a young girl, young woman see that there's somebody who's there supportive of them, who has done it and loved it, and who has done it and may not love it so much, but still can give insight, I think is really, really important. I saw all of you kind of nodding when Gabriella was
Yeah.
speaking. So I want to give you all a chance to kind of chime in and add your supportive response.
Rebecca, I'll just make a quick comment and then I'll toss to you. I was going to say, I'd even like to advocate for, those of you who are on the line that are parents or your, aunts and uncles or grandparents. I also am a firm believer that, biases can start at home. And I think we have the ability to encourage the young adults and the young children that are in our lives to pursue their passion. And that passion, Gabriella, this is not a anti-college in any means at all. So I don't want it to sound like that. We need to encourage our children and young adults to, they may not all be college material. Okay. And I think that while I am an advocate for college, I believe in that. I also believe that there are some awesome opportunities for students to go into direct to work experiences, get some on the job training, and then find their niche. They may not be ready at 18 years old to know what they want to major in college. And so for some kids, going direct to work and providing those supports for them in their 11th or 12th grade years to know that that's okay and know that there is great career opportunities for students to go that pathway, get some on the job training, and then perhaps then when they have their niche, go and then have some, continuing ed, whether it's an associate's degree, a certificate, or a bachelor's degree. I think that, we need to do a better job with our kids from the beginning and again, squash those stigmas of, you will only be successful if you obtain a college degree at your, ripe age of 18 or 19 as a freshman in college. So again, it's just advocating for students to really ask them to follow and pursue their passions and do our best as adults to help them find those pathways that make them most happy.
I really love that. And I think that ties in really well with what Gabriella was saying, because with mentorships, because I think wherever we are and wherever these girls and young women and professional women are, they need resources and support to help them navigate these family and work options, and to plan their education and career goals accordingly, and to be flexible as life unfolds, right? Because who ended up in the place where they thought they were going to be? And so to be flexible as we navigate these paths and help provide that to the girls who are exploring these things. I also wanted to add that, Lachelle, I love that you said, like, this has been happening for 100 years, and you said why, and I was like, well, like, that's a whole other conversation, but we know that women's decisions are tied to cultural norms and structures and attitudes, like Rachel was talking about, and these influences lead women to make choices, and so women's choices, I would argue, aren't always attributed solely to preference, because they're tied to and made in this structure that we live in and are influenced by these social experiences that we have. But I think because of that, I loved Gabriella's example of what she specifically did in her program, because while we've seen these things and talked about them, I would push back a little bit and say that we haven't moved the needle at all. I think that it's amazing what you've seen, how you've seen more women in post-secondary education. You've seen women earning bachelor's degrees. I totally agree with Rachel that you see less women in these skilled and trades positions, and that's a place there's still this stigma, but I do think you see movement. But I think sometimes it's hard to remember that it's a long game, that when I talk about my 5-year-old, she's going to graduate from college in, I don't know, a long time, like, this is a long time. And so we're looking at these things over time. And I think that that's, rather than being disheartening, I think that should be encouraging, I guess, in that we're trying to do it right, and that we're taking time to understand and to pilot things and to try things and to course correct and to evaluate what we're doing and say, hey, is this having an impact? And I think that one of the best ways that we do that is when we're really specific and local at the implementation. And I sit on a number of groups, and I expect that you ladies do as well, that are have a more national focus. And that is really important in some of the broader issues that we've talked about in terms of setting up structural issues or awareness broadly. But in terms of making like one-on-one impacts, what works for Gabriele's research group and in her graduate program is going to be different than what one of my companies needs to do in Houston to attract more women into their pipeline. And so talking about it broadly, I loved what Rachel said, that we're going to talk about this until we don't have to talk about it anymore. But talking about it broadly and at a high level, I think, to keep the momentum and keep things moving forward, but then to be really specific and targeted in what this looks like on the ground. This is not a theoretical conversation, right? This is a practical, real life, real world application issue that then I have to turn around and do something about it with my small group and in the area where I have influence. And so figuring out those local specifics that we need to address. And I would just add really quickly that I need to apparently be better in the chat, but the question that you had asked about the petrochemical jobs, I think is a really important, valid question. How I understood the question is, could it be that women just don't want to take these jobs because they don't want to work in these jobs or in this industry? And for my perspective, I think that that's a really important question. That was something that we asked about in this research that I talked about that we did. And I have to say, honestly, I was kind of surprised by the answer that women for the natural gas and oil industry and in these petrochemical jobs, that women, for the most part, said, hey, yeah, totally interested, totally willing to work there. I just don't understand a lot about what you do or what I would do with you. And so it wasn't a bias against a particular industry or occupation. And even in male dominated, and the women said, hey, look, I have no problem being in a more male dominated industry. Like, I'm okay with that. I can handle that. But will I do a good job? But will my skills fit? But like, how am I actually contributing? How is this meaningful for me? Those were the kinds of things that women were more worried about.
I'm glad you brought that up, the localization of approaches. There's tons of questions in the Q&A, and so I'm going to try to put them all together. Well, not all of them. I'm going to try my best. So a lot of them deal with just the sense of belonging, right? So there's a question about what's happening as it relates to queer women. There's another comment or question around, those who succeed or who drop out, I should say, aren't doing the best, right? And so we need to do a better job at saying, even if you're not at the top of your class, it doesn't mean you won't do a good job. Think about the lawyers and doctors that you visit every day. We have no idea if they had C averages or A averages, right? But we still put our confidence in them. And so I wonder, why is that, where you stand and where you fall on this ranking system? Why does that deter somebody who may be in the middle? So it sounds like there's this sense of belonging that needs to just be paid more attention to, as you were talking about, to the many variety of women we have and all their amazing interests, right? There's someone in the chat who also mentioned we need to give girls and women earlier experiences. That could attribute to what you were saying. People just don't know, women just don't know how they contribute and how their skill set will contribute to the job at hand. And so if they had earlier access to the ways in which these skills and interests can contribute, maybe that could answer that question at a sooner rate than when they're applying for the job or when a recruiter comes to them, right? So I'm trying to put all these question answers. We only have about 8 minutes, but feel free to look at the open questions that are in the chat, but they seem to have a common theme. Those who have communication disorders is what I'm also reading. They may have speech or hearing disorders, et cetera. And so there's this notion of a sense of belonging, no matter where you're from and how you perform and things of that nature. What do you all think about those comments?
Well, I'm going to answer that also responding to something that Rebecca said, which is that we do need to act locally because, there will be local sort of implementations of every change. But I do think we need to act globally we need to act locally, but with a global understanding and global connections, because a lot of these things are very similar, right? Where the example I gave was really about recruiting someone through creating a space where they feel comfortable and could see someone in the organization they were joining who they identified with, right? It was an identity choice. And so I think that that's important, for women. That's important for people who identify as non-binary or, anything else, to really make sure that you can set up some of those systems of belongings. And the example I gave was around that transition. But I think sometimes these transitions can be much, much longer, right? Like we have some programs where we have undergrads come and do research at MIT to think about if that's a step they want to take. We have, programs for K through 12 education so that they can come and see people who look like potentially older versions of themselves who are here. So it's a way of, yes, there's a global context and a global understanding, but really locally in front of you, seeing someone and beginning to feel comfortable in a space.
Nice. There's another question that just came up. What are those pathways that are options in STEM that can be achieved without education, right? Where women and girls can enter straight from high school. I haven't thought about that.
This question.
Rachel, okay, great. Yes.
We love this question. You go ahead.
I know. I was going to say, there's a couple, and I will exclude, I'm sure, some industries, but there are manufacturing jobs. There are skilled trade jobs that either students can go through apprenticeship programs, they can go through vocational technical school experiences in their high school years, that a lot of those organizations are associated with trade organizations that are very willing to provide them with training on the job as they go. I think a lot of it is students or young adults' willingness and interest in that particular area. And I think that's half the battle. And I think getting them to see some of the great career opportunities and future pathways that lie in those organizations is the key to, having students understand, like, I can make a career of this. This is going to be a very successful career for me. So it, again, supports the whole, see it to be it mentality that we talk about so much at Discovery. But I think Rebecca would concur that there are a ton of jobs that don't necessarily require that level of post-secondary education in order to become employed.
And where you can earn a good living while you're continuing your education.
Exactly.
When Rachel mentioned the apprenticeship program, and in talking about mentorships, the apprenticeship is set up that way. And so we work really closely with the North American Building Trades Unions, NAB2, but pipe fitters, welders, electricians, plumbers, mechanical technicians, things that either apprenticeships in these trades or things you can get technical degrees in at like a technical or community college are in very high demand. In fact, over half of the job opportunities I talked about in our industry, those 1.9 million, over half of them are in these types of jobs.
Yeah, I think I'm going to push back. Who was that answer that asked that question? I don't remember your name, but I do want to push back a little bit. You need education. Even if you enter a job out of high school and you get on the job training, there is no such thing as doing well in the future in STEM careers. And we don't even know what those STEM careers are yet in 10 years, right? And so I would caution against saying without education, because you're going to always need some type of training. You're going to have to learn how to problem solve in your field. What are the constraints in your field? And so don't think that you're just going to get a high school education and the learning stops, because that is definitely not the case. But the traditional pathway that everybody talk about may be a little different. And so I want to plug our STEM Ed for Girls program where it's over the summer, so look out for 2022. But we talk about the different pathways in each of the STEM fields, and we give a career packet, and we talk about what are the different educational pathways. So definitely look out for that, because we will lay out some very specifics as it relates to different careers and the education or the learning that needs to take place. I also see that we have 3 minutes left. So I could give you all a quick, what's one takeaway that you got from this this conversation? And as we're doing that, Tremaine, if you could put the poll up, let's see if anybody has a difference of opinion. But yes, to our panelists, what's one thing we can ensure that everybody walks away with in 5 words or less? What do you think?
5 words. That's
no,
it.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I would say that I really love the variety of perspectives that we have on this conversation. I think that with the elementary, the secondary, the post-secondary education side by side with the industry and the community perspectives, I think that these are really important when we talk about closing gaps in meaningful ways, that we have to have these kinds of conversations where we bring a lot of different stakeholders together, and that has to happen in order to support meaningful growth and change. So I'm grateful that we could talk about this today. And I would also add that I think part of that partnership is at the grassroots level, and it's being able to talk and connect and learn with other people who are interested in these issues and the things that we are doing. And so I would just say that anyone who is interested in the energy side of all of this and in the energy policy side, we have a great organization called Energy Citizens. There's a link to it. We have a great organization called Energy Citizens where we talk about energy and energy policy and how these types of issues are impacting our communities. And so if it's something you're interested in, would encourage you to participate. But I'm grateful we could have this conversation today and look forward to continuing the work going forward.
Awesome. Rachel, Rebecca.
Yes.
Rachel or Gabriella, sorry.
Yeah, I would just say really quickly, just encourage the young adults and the young children that are in your lives to follow their passions, talk to their teachers, talk to their family members, try to get them involved in during school programs, out of school programs, which there are a ton of those in our communities across the country that will all inadvertently talk about STEM careers in some shape or fashion. So I would just send any opportunity that you have to get involved in making a difference in children's lives in that way would be absolutely wonderful and encouraged.
Gabrielle?
So I just wanted to end by actually responding to something that was mentioned in one of the Q&As, which was about the cost of a PhD. And so some people may not know that a PhD in STEM, there is no cost to the student. The student does research and their work as a researcher is supported by grants. And so I just want to highlight that there's a lot of aspects of this that really are open and enabling and encourage people to check out. And, here at MIT, we're in the center of Kendall Square, around the corner from companies some of you may have heard of, Pfizer, Moderna. And so it's really an exploding field of biotech. And there's a huge number of really exciting, innovative biotech jobs, and they require a PhD. But that door is open because it is a funded position. The jobs that can be done with a bachelor's in biotech are actually, we're not so competitive with what's being done in China financially. So really getting that PhD, which gets supported by the grants from the research that's done, does open a lot of opportunities in these fields that have seen tremendous growth over the past decades and certainly since March 2020.
Nice. I want to just thank you all for having the courage of attempting to tackle this topic in 1 hour or less. So it seems we will have to continue this conversation, I believe. I will say that AAUW is starting a STEM think tank for STEM education and beyond. And so if you're interested in participating in that and more conversations like this, please contact me as soon as you can. And I want to take one last look at our poll. It looks like at the end of this conversation, 83% have said that an unbiased K through 12 STEM education, that is the leakiest part of this pipeline. And so, Rachel, I think that sends a lot of homework for you at Discovery Education, but it puts the onus on all of us because, those are the seeds that have been planted, and we got to make sure that they grow and can thrive in, the next 20 or 30 years. So it sounds like this is a to be continued conversation. I thank you all for joining us today, and I definitely want to thank API for sponsoring this webinar. If you have any questions about anything related to this webinar, please contact Tremaine. His contact information is on the screen. And I apologize, there's still questions in the Q&A. So again, this is definitely going to be a to be continued conversation. So, but for now, thank you for your attention this evening, and we'll see you next time.